In 1984, the Federal Communications Commission did something remarkable. They essentially stopped regulating children's television. What happened next was the most brazen example of turning entertainment into advertising that America had ever seen. Toy companies didn't just sponsor cartoons anymore. They created them, funded them, and used them as half-hour product demonstrations disguised as storytelling. The result was a commercial arms race so aggressive it generated billions in action figure sales and nearly got the entire industry hauled in front of Congress. This is the story of how three companies turned Saturday morning television into a corporate battlefield, and how an entire generation of kids became willing participants in the most successful marketing experiment in history. But before the war officially began, one company had already rewritten the rules. In 1977, Kenner's Star Wars line became the most successful boys' toy franchise in history, selling hundreds of millions of figures and establishing the 3.75-inch scale that would define the decade. Kenner entered the 1980s as the undisputed king of the action figure aisle, and Mattel and Hasbro knew they needed their own empires if they wanted to survive. The war began in 1982, though nobody realized it was a war yet. Hasbro relaunched G.I. Joe as smaller action figures after the original 12-inch line had died in the 1970s oil crisis. The new Joe figures were smaller, cheaper to produce, and came with something revolutionary: file cards on the back of each package that gave every character a code name, specialty, and backstory. Kids weren't just buying a toy soldier anymore. They were collecting a roster of characters with personalities. Hasbro partnered with Marvel Comics to create backstory and hired advertising legend Griffin Bacall to produce a syndicated cartoon series. G.I. Joe, a real American hero, premiered in 1983, and it was something new, an entire animated series designed specifically to sell toys. New characters and vehicles regularly appeared in the show to support Hasbro's expanding roster, creating a tight synergy between the cartoon and the toy aisle. Then, G.I. Joe exploded. Kids didn't just want one figure, they wanted the whole team, and the vehicles, and the playsets. Hasbro had stumbled onto a formula that would define the decade. At the same time, Mattel launched He-Man and the Masters of the Universe in 1982, and suddenly there was actual competition. Mattel had created He-Man as a sword and sorcery property specifically to sell action figures, complete with a castle playset that cost as much as some families spent on groceries. The accompanying cartoon, produced by Filmation, premiered in 1983 and became the most-watched children's show in America. By 1984, He-Man commanded roughly 20% of the entire U.S. toy market. Mattel was generating over $400 million annually from the line. They had ads running during every commercial break of children's programming. Store shelves were stocked with He-Man figures, vehicles, and Castle Grayskull playsets. For one brief moment, Mattel looked unstoppable. Hasbro's response was Transformers, and it changed everything. In 1984, Hasbro licensed toy molds from Japanese companies Takara and imported the concept to America. These weren't just action figures. They were robots that transformed into vehicles. The gimmick was brilliant. Kids got two toys in one, which justified higher price points and generated obsessive collecting behavior. Hasbro did with Transformers what they'd done with G.I. Joe, but bigger. They partnered with Marvel again for comics and backstory. They funded an animated series through Sunbow Productions and Marvel Productions. They created an entire mythology: Autobots versus Decepticons, a war that had lasted millions of years, with new characters arriving on Earth every few episodes who would, coincidentally, appear in stores shortly thereafter. Transformers became a juggernaut. By 1986, the line was generating roughly $500 million in annual sales. The cartoon was airing in syndication across the country. Hasbro had essentially created a second massive franchise using the exact same playbook, and Mattel was watching their He-Man dominance erode. Kenner, owned by General Mills at the time, had been dominating the action figure market with Star Wars since 1977. But by the mid-1980s, the Star Wars films had stopped, and new movies weren't coming. Kids who had grown up with Luke Skywalker were aging out, and the younger kids wanted Transformers and G.I. Joe. Kenner's attempts to create original properties like Mask in 1985 had some success, but they were always playing catch-up to Hasbro's marketing machine. What made the Toy Wars remarkable wasn't just the competition, it was the complete integration of product and entertainment. By 1985, American television was awash in toy-driven animation, a surge of half-hour series fueled by FCC deregulation, and an industry suddenly free to market directly to kids. It was advertising that kids begged their parents to let them watch. Critics and parent groups noticed. Action for Children's Television, led by Peggy Charon, began campaigning against what they called program-length commercials. They argued that young children couldn't distinguish between entertainment and advertising, and that these shows were essentially manipulating kids into becoming salespeople who nagged their parents for toys. The toy companies had a response. These shows were providing quality entertainment that happened to feature products. They pointed out that Mickey Mouse and Bugs Bunny had merchandise too. They noted that G.I. Joe episodes included public service announcements teaching kids about safety and responsibility. They argued that kids loved these shows, and wasn't that what mattered? What they didn't mention was that these programs existed solely to move plastic off shelves, and that every creative decision, every character, every vehicle, every plot point was reverse-engineered from what would make compelling toys. The peak came around 1985 to 1986. Action figures were everywhere. Every major toy company had their own cartoon-backed line. Store aisles were packed with competing franchises. Kids had to choose sides. Were you a Transformers kid or a He-Man kid? G.I. Joe or Star Wars? The playground conversations resembled brand loyalty discussions that would make marketing executives weep with joy. Then the market began to saturate. By 1987, He-Man sales had collapsed. Kids had moved on. Mattel tried spin-offs like She-Ra, Princess of Power, but they couldn't recapture the magic. The company had flooded the market with figures, and parents had stopped buying. The cartoon went off the air. The toys lingered on clearance shelves. Transformers and G.I. Joe lasted longer, but they faced their own problems. The Transformers movie in 1986 famously killed off Optimus Prime to introduce new toy lines, and the fan backlash was so severe that Hasbro eventually brought him back. G.I. Joe kept introducing new characters and vehicles until the roster became absurdly bloated and parents couldn't keep track of who was who. The antitrust scrutiny the toy companies feared never quite materialized, though there were hearings and investigations. The FCC eventually implemented some mild regulations in 1990, but by then the damage, or the success, depending on your perspective, was done. The toy-to-TV model had proven spectacularly profitable, and every toy company in America had taken notes. The 1980s toy wars weren't really about which company won. They all won. Hasbro, Mattel, and Kenner made billions of dollars by transforming children's entertainment into the most effective advertising platform ever created. They proved that if you give kids a mythology, memorable characters, and a Saturday morning cartoon, they'll beg their parents to buy plastic representations of those characters. The real winners, in a sense, were the toy executives who figured out that the FCC's deregulation had created a loophole you could drive a Castle Grayskull through. They realized that the line between entertainment and advertising didn't have to exist at all if you were clever about it. They took that insight and generated enough revenue to fundamentally reshape the toy industry. The losers? Well, that depends on your perspective. Parents spent billions on action figures that would eventually end up in garage sales and landfills. Kids became enthusiastic participants in corporate marketing campaigns, though they had a lot of fun doing it. And television became a battleground where commercial interests trumped any pretense of educational value or artistic merit. But here's the thing about the toy wars. They worked because kids genuinely loved these toys and cartoons. The shows were, cynical marketing aside, often entertaining. The toys were, commercial manipulation aside, genuinely fun to play with. The companies were exploiting children's natural love of play and storytelling, but they were also providing something kids wanted. Whether that makes it better or worse is a question that's been debated since 1982, usually by people who owned either He-Man or Transformers figures and remember them fondly despite understanding, as adults, exactly what was being done to them. So here's the question. Were you part of the toy wars? Did you collect G.I. Joe, Transformers, or He-Man? Let us know in the comments below. After all, the 1980s toy wars taught us that the most effective advertisement isn't a 30-second commercial. It's a 30-minute cartoon that kids actually want to watch.